Ace Combat is a titan of a series, one that can spend multiple years in Project Ace's oven and release to mass appeal. Are they all perfect? No. Are they all fun? Beyond. Are they ever going to make a remastered collection? There's nothing that competes with Ace Combat other than a new Ace Combat, encapsulating fans old and new with each entry. This is a dream situation because when it comes to arcade-style flying games, most of them fail. Forgotten, lacking, and just missing something. While a slightly different story today, back in the 2000s there were so many flying games coming out for consoles and most of them got completely ignored. Most of them were from no-name publishers or developers. Not to cramp your style to any developers watching, but who really remembers developers like Totally Games, Wildworks, Trickstar, or Headstrong? These games would either have a minuscule audience, shovelware, or copy and pasted shovelware. There was only one publisher that was either crazy mad, crazy drunk, or crazy mad and drunk enough to take on the wombo combo that was Bandai Namco and Project Aces. Oh no. Before making the same game, Siege and Heavy Armor Siege, before whatever this is, Ubisoft was pushing to make games back then, branching in all sorts of different directions just to get a foot in the door. For some reason though, the publisher saw Ace Combat and wanted one of its own. An arcade flying game with great polish to round up an adoring fanbase and be able to make sequels galore. They had some experience with flying games as they did publish several successful IL-2 games, but they wanted that Ace Combat money. And they sure tried. Boy, did they try. In this video, I'm going to take a look at some of their more iconic franchises in this genre. 4 in particular, 6 games total, and one more game that exists. But before we dive in, we need to understand what makes Ace Combat so successful, and that's fairly straightforward. Solid, entertaining campaigns with memorable set pieces, a wide selection of aircraft that can be equipped with every explosive ordnance as illogically possible, and tight, responsive controls that can be tweaked to either a simplistic arcade style or a more realistic simcade style that allows for players to live out their Blue Angels fantasies in combat. With the grounds laid out, let's dive into the first, Ubi Combat. Our first game is considered to be one of the best, at least according to the critics, fans, and me. Heroes of the Pacific, developed by Australian developer Transmission Games, known for their role in making Australian football games. Heroes was made for the Xbox, PlayStation 2, and PC in 2005. I actually really liked this game as a kid, and I like it just as much now as an adult. The plot is straightforward, but nicely told. We play as William Crow, a young man who, ever since he and his brother Charlie were kids, loved the idea of flying. They both joined the military, William enlisting in the Air Force and Charlie in the Navy. They got stationed in Pearl Harbor, right when the 1941 attack happens. Charlie gets stationed on the Arizona, which promptly sinks and kills him. Out of revenge and pure American patriotism, William must endure the skies of the Pacific Theater to win the war and avenge his brother through a mixture of his own story and actual documentation. Heroes immediately does one thing right, and that's the art style, the menus and cutscenes. They looked at that Uncle Sam poster or any other American propaganda of the time and did that. Everywhere. From the main menu, plain select, even the options menu feels straight out of 1940s propaganda posters. Even in game, there are hints of sepia and film grain that gives Heroes a distinct wartime footage feel. But what about the actual gameplay? It's a bit mixed, to be honest. It definitely feels like an arcade playing game, though you can have a more manual control scheme if you want. I wouldn't recommend playing with professional controls though. The planes feel floaty and lack the instantaneous response and handling. Granted, these are World War II aircraft, but as you'll see later down the line, these planes feel odd to fly already, and having professional controls on made it feel as if I was flying a loaf of Wonder Bread. Where Heroes does excel at is in presentation and moment-to-moment gameplay. Maps and battles are fairly big. There are large swarms of aircraft that will properly fly in formation. There's a great level during the defense of Midway Island where all the Japanese Val bombers refuse to break formation, making a rear attack dangerous. Ships and AA guns will litter the skies with flak that can quickly kill you if you're not paying attention. And dogfights feel exciting, especially during the ace battles. There's even a good variety of missions you'll be partaking in. Some are air raids on a base, defending ground troops, sinking ships, even performing recon in a PBY. There's more too, as playing on higher difficulties unlocks more unique planes. You can upgrade the planes and even switch between which version of the plane you want to fly. And there are extra missions outside of the main campaign. An overall good package, though there were definitely some noticeable issues. Even on the hardest difficulty, this game is fairly easy. There were some interesting issues with the physics. The game didn't look that great since being on an older generation of consoles. The art style was on point, but the graphics were definitely lacking. Transmission was trying their best, and in many ways, it's quite detailed. Pools of oil form when a ship sinks, your screen can get bloodied by enemy fire. When ships fire their main guns, the water around them ripples and makes waves. But they were working with aging hardware and not much else. And the voice acting is a slightly mixed bag of pretty good to why are they whispering when they should be yelling and I can hear you're hiding your Australian accent.
Okay, this is Lieutenant Commander Callahan. Calling all units in Victor Squadron. Line up in formation over the Lexington. Our bearing is 050. Over.
God damn it! Hold your fire! Hell, I'm sorry, Murphy. I gotta head back, boss. I'm leaking oil like crazy.
All right, Stewart. You can escort him back, seeing as you caused the snafu in the first place. Move! Get out of my sight!
Scramble, scramble! Lieutenant Crow, get off that deck. We got zeros inbound. Oh, God! No! The Arizona's magazine is blown. There were thousands of men in there.
This is the HMAS camera to the unidentified plane to our south. Identify yourself right now or we'll plug you one.
There's even some strange dialogue lines. What? One of the most odd is when you're commanding your squadron. They'll mostly respond with, okay, I'm on it, or Roger, attacking targets. There's a strange bug where when issuing an order, this very strange non-radio voice comes on, and it's the most out-of-place line ever.
Commence bombing run.
The bastard's nailing me.
That wasn't edited, that was in the game.
Commence bombing run.
Why? The biggest issue was that Ubisoft decided that the best time to release the game was back in July of 2005, 4 months before the Xbox 360 came out. Still, it is a pretty decent experience. Acquiring a copy is difficult and it isn't backwards compatible, but if you're interested, I'm sure you can find a way to play it. Hell, you can play it in split screen with a friend if you want. As a first attempt, it did decently for what Ubisoft was aiming for, but it wasn't enough. They needed something better, something that could take advantage of the newly released 7th generation hardware, and they did so with Blazing Angels. Marking the first time an arcade flight game was made in-house, developed by Ubisoft Bucharest, Blazing Angels is strange. There are obvious signs where the developers put in a ton of effort, such as presentation. It was rare for the time to have games with massive smoke plumes. Then you look at Blazing Angels and just stare in awe. The battlefields and skies would be filled with black smoke that can affect the player's visibility. Skyboxes have vastly improved over Heroes. They truly vary not only in the time of day, but color. The midway battle alone feels like something out of a wartime poster. Even the detail on the ground is impressive. Roads are active with vehicles, personnel running around on the ground, even if it still looks a little goofy, and the explosions are extremely satisfying, especially torpedoes impacting a ship. It is interesting to compare the Pacific Theater levels in Blazing Angels with the levels in Heroes. Everything is bigger, grander, and more happens on screen. And yet, as an overall package, Heroes is much better. Personality. It's something that every creature, human or not, has that makes us unique and different from one another. Though it isn't limited to the organic, but the inorganic as well. You know everything about a Corvette compared to a Prius by just looking at them. Heroes from the menus alone feels like a wartime film, with all the posters and film grain. Now let's look at Blazing Angels menu. It's not bad, it has everything that a menu should have, it just feels generic, and also strange. Why are they using Comic fucking Sans for the in-game text and then something else for the menus? Unfortunately, it's also broad in gameplay as well. Immediately, you are greeted with a lack of choice. You are not allowed to switch aircraft for a mission. Even after completing all the missions, you cannot fly missions with different aircraft. The only workaround is to play online co-op with friends, which, being a Ubisoft product. But don't worry, the Romanians solved this lack of choice for solo players by making all the planes feel the same. Their top speed varies, somewhat, and you do fly bombers with rear-mounted turrets, but all the planes fly, turn, and output damage the same. There is zero difference of damage between a Hurricane with cannons and a Dauntless with machine guns or a Gladiator with machine guns. Actually, there is one difference. You can take out tanks with cannons. Aside from that, guns and cannons feel the same against airplanes. The planes in Heroes felt dramatically different from one another. A Dauntless would struggle to fight Mitsubishi Zeros. A P-40, even at max upgrade, will struggle against later stage aircraft. Blazing Angels has turned some of the most iconic and beloved aircraft of all time into gray, dull slop. It isn't even solved with dogfighting because most of the time, your squadron will get rid of any tails you might have and even repair your plane mid-flight. The narrative is also nothing impressive. There is something to be said when the game sold on last-gen hardware had better voice acting and spoken foreign language than the next-gen one.
We're having some sort of trouble with the main engine. I'm the first. You are the first.
January 1st, 1945. Operation Bodenplatte. Happy New Year, and here comes the Luftwaffe.
The UI isn't great either. No altimeter to show how high you are. Targets are small and hidden thanks to the amounts of on-screen action. The game has no arrows to track your current target, so you're always having to hold left trigger to look at the current target, which gets disorienting and old rather quickly. Blazing Angels also came out during the BDER era of games, so while this game can look spectacular in some places, a lot of the color can appear muted and lackluster. But thankfully, once again, the Romanians thought of that too, by maximizing the bloom.
Oh dear lord, the bloom!
I can see the smoke from here!
I can't.
But by far the worst part about this game is the performance. The frame drops you have been seeing was captured on an Xbox 360 version. Now, I could have gotten the PC version, but that has been long delisted. Even though I'm running old hardware, when the game was new it ran like this. It's rough, and it makes some missions feel nearly unplayable at certain points. or simply breaks the game's AI. Overall, Blazing Angels Squadrons of World War II, full title, is somewhat of a letdown on the 360. There's one outlier to this game, and that's the PS3 version. Published by D3 Publisher instead and released as a launch title, the PS3 version is oddly the superior of the versions. It has better UI, better AI, you can switch aircraft, your character talks, you can use 6-axis motion, and it got rid of the Comic Sans. The graphics are the only sacrifice, and it just doesn't look as good as the 360 version. Did I mention that there was a Wii version? 2006 would be a very busy year when it came to their goal, as only a few short months later, their next and true attempt at an Ace Combat competitor took to the shelves. Developed by legendary studio Taito, known for such games as Space Invaders, Bubble Bobble, and Operation Wolf, Over G Fighters is an Ace Combat clone. From the OST to the near 60 FPS, even the anime-inspired character designs and dialogue. And of course, rather than old prop jobs, we have proper jets in a modern conflict. There's just a few things that are different from Ace Combat. Many things. Everything. If this game froze, I wouldn't be surprised. Are you there, buddy? I think she broke. I don't know how to best describe this game other than rushed and slapped together, while desperately trying to invoke the same emotions and senses from Ace Combat, but doing things realistically? Though not really? You know how there's a binary difference between arcade sim and simcade racers? Over G lies somewhere in between arcade and simcade, I think. It's a very odd feeling game because it does some cool things while being blanketed by everything terrible about it. For example, you can black out during high G turns. There's your Over G and Over G Fighters. You also have a more realistic supply of ordnance. Gone are the infinite regenerating ammo from the previous flight games. And rules of engagement are a little more realistic. Barely. In order to target an enemy, you need to have a radar lock. But in order for that to happen, you need to get close enough to someone in order to get a radar lock. But in order for you to do that, you need to find the enemy. That doesn't sound hard since there's a minimap, but that minimap doesn't really tell you much. Neither does your heads-up display about the enemy until you get close enough. Or sometimes your computer or co-pilot, depending on the aircraft, will find a target right when you're flying by. So you turn to the aircraft, and this is where one of the biggest problems arises. These planes are all completely horrid to control. Slow, clunky, no sense of speed, even when low to the ground. What makes them more clunky to control is the controls. Usually throttle and brake are assigned to either the right stick or, if they have them, the triggers. The latter feels the best because, like a racing game, you can more accurately apply as much acceleration or braking when needed. For some reason, Taito thought that the triggers are for the rudders and the bumpers are for adjusting speed. But hey, at least you can reassign any button you want in the options menu. Apart from the bumpers, and the triggers, and a few other buttons. And that's not the worst part. Because while we can all laugh at the god-awful voice acting...
I'll now brief you on your next mission. We've confirmed the approach of ground vehicles to the enemy's base. We believe this to be a transport unit carrying replenishment supplies. Gargoyle, intercept immediately. Hit that transport unit.
Members of the EAF, as chairman, please allow me to thank you for your tireless service.
Not a bad choice. This aircraft will suffice. Now, let us get going.
Was that a Russian accent? The wannabe briefings, constant hard crashes. The game hard crashed. No, really, this game hard crashes after 2 or 3 missions. Or the overall presentation, we can really laugh at the mission structure. Mission 1, take down the bombers. I took out the bombers and I win. Mission complete. Mission 2, take out 5 fighter jets. I took out the fighter jets and I won. Alright. Mission 3, take out 3 tanks. I did that and it only took me 30 seconds. Mission 5, take out 5 tanks. Mission 6, take out 2 tanks, then take out 4 more. Look, many of Ace Combat 4's early missions feel extremely easy too, but at least they lasted more than 30 seconds. And at least I felt under threat by something that I could actually fight. In Over G, if you get locked on, you cannot outturn the incoming missile easily. Because the aircraft in this game has less maneuverability than the Agaion, you have a very slim chance in outturning a missile. So you'll have to work on your chaffs, which barely worked for me. This game broke me. But it broke itself more by hard crashing my 360 several times after completing 2 or 3 missions in a row. In conclusion, fucking garbage game. Avoid like the plague. I'm embarrassed I even got an achievement out of it. Though this malice may have been shared both ways, as Ubisoft distanced themselves far away from Over G and Taito. And Taito went on to make shovelware for mobile platforms. So, the publisher went back to the drawing board, back to their roots. They went back to World War II. Though this time, a bit differently. While the first game was a dull, rushed, and unimpressive mess, Blazing Angels 2: Secret Weapons of World War II, full name drop, is far from it. Ubisoft Bucharest learned a lot from their first venture, what worked, what didn't, and what people wanted out of it. Where it really tells a difference is in the tutorial mission. Our character, Captain Robinson, is flying a Spitfire at a modern-day air show. The game goes over the basics of controlling the aircraft and allows you to just embrace the beauty of the updated graphics. Lights, reflections, shadows, even ground detail gets a massive overhaul from the original game while not making my Xbox light itself on fire. We get introduced to who Robinson is, showcasing the much improved voice acting, and then you're treated to one of the slickest transitions I've ever seen.
Me and this British squad leader named Eddie Thatcher. You see, it was during the phony war. Thatcher and I were running a basic drill for trainee pilots. We ran into a squad of German pilots out doing recon. All hell broke loose.
Blazing Angels 2 came out only a year and a half after the first, yet it feels like a completely different game. Planes feel more distinct from one another. The game's many jets are extremely fast, but have a poor turning radius. There's a wide variety of rockets and bombs that change up the playstyle. Rear gunners are more deadly, new mechanics, UI has been vastly improved, new ventures, and now for most of the missions, you can choose what aircraft you can fly. Finally! There's a ton of aircraft you can choose to take to the skies. From prop jobs that appeared in the war, to experimental machines that barely made the blueprint. Even better, all the planes are visually customizable and internally upgradable. One major new feature is defensive weapons. These can help you out of a hairy situation without the reliance on your squadron. One thing that really sticks out is how the structure of the missions never feel exactly the same. You're always fighting in locations that feel genuinely different from one another, doing different tasks. In one, you're dealing with an armored Zeppelin in Cairo. In another, you're participating at the parade in Red Square, only to switch over and defend the city from Germans. What adds to the depth of these levels are the updated graphics. Same engine, but the higher res textures and brightening up of the colors provide for much better visuals and perspective. There are still slowdowns, sure, but they're less consistent, leaving you to play the game reasonably well. The music gets a notable upgrade as well. While still not the most expansive track list, at least Jason Graves made tracks that sound different from one another. Even the story and characters are much better. While nothing completely groundbreaking, it does two things that the first game was lacking: entertainment and memorable characters. The cutscenes are done through these Max Payne style comics that might seem jarring at first, but actually fit really well. The voice actors take their roles seriously. You can hear the frustration in Robinson's voice, with a stern but cautious tone of Marguerite.
So here's something that you don't know. You are doomed. Your proud armies, your big countries, your shiny machines of war, they mean nothing. They will be wiped out, and you with them. Destruction and death will rain from the skies, and only ashes will remain.
Better not forget my umbrella, then.
Canterbury. Wicket, this is Canterbury. Do you read? The tide is going out. I say again, the tide is going out. Confirm. Wicket out.
What now? You intend to kill me?
Not unless I have to. You're not like von Kluger, Max. Come with me.
Do you think I would sell my loyalty so cheaply? No. Do what you must. If you mean to continue with your mission, you will have to kill me first. Do it. I have no regrets.
Drawbacks? Well, like last time, the campaign is fairly short, but not too bad. The new menus are a little slow to load up. Really, there's only one complaint I have. You can't play it anymore. This isn't new. Ubisoft cares for its own IPs as much as HBO cares about what they're called. Over G can be forgotten since it's just shovelware in a green package, but both Blazing Angels games have active communities on Steam, which have now become walled gardens. There are keys out there if you really want to play this, but genuinely the easiest way to play these games is to buy a 360 or PS3 and just buy the used copies. Because it's 2023, and we're in the hell where Ubisoft can only make the bad one backwards compatible. Anyway, Blazing Angels 2 did many things right, and showed that Ubisoft internally could make a competent arcade flight combat game. The publisher understood that their Bucharest studio now had the experience in making these kinds of games, and so they tasked the Romanians to make the next Ace Combat killer. Judging from the timeline, it's fair to say that development took place immediately after Blazing Angels 2, maybe slightly before. Annoyingly, a lot of these games have their development histories under wraps. Only bits and pieces are out there, and whatever can be sewn together is by the obvious. The real major news was that this next-gen game would be using some incredibly advanced technology. Ubisoft enlisted satellite imagery for the maps for this next project. The images would come from GOI and their satellite, the Iconos. Pretty top-level tech, because the project has a distinguished name behind it. No longer were we in the Second World War. Gone was the thought of a blatant cash grab. HAWX was Ubisoft's own design. But what makes HAWX different from Ace Combat, yet feeling familiar enough to attract that fanbase? Quite a lot, actually. A leveling system that is shared between single and multiplayer, unlocking new planes, loadouts, and skins. A massive selection of planes ranging from the usual air-to-air, multi-role, and close air support. And more noticeably, a real-world setting, sharing a universe with the Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter series. The biggest alteration to the formula would be the ERS and the Assistance Off features. The former is not related to energy management or racing. It stands for an Enhanced Reality System, which can help you set up an attack or dodge a missile. And then there's the Off system. You ever go on the Ace Combat subreddit and you see bullshit like this? You watch this and you know they don't cut their anime with reality or sex. Ubisoft had an answer to this. Allow for anyone to do this. Double tapping either of the triggers shoots out the camera and completely flips the controls from the more realistic rotate and pull back on the stick to an arcade layout of turn the stick left or right to go left or right. What it also does is change to the physics of the jet, allowing for more extreme maneuvers. Air drifting, high G flips, even stalling out could be a tool for escaping a situation. In essence, it is Ubisoft's answer to Ace Combat, and it does show some sort of promise. The gameplay does get intense, jets feel good to fly, and there is a lot of content. So why, after all these years, as unique in design and execution, has it always received a mixed reception? Let's go down the list. Graphically, the game looks fine, but severely outclassed when compared to Ace Combat 6, which came out 2 years earlier. How could that be? Doesn't the game use GOI's advanced imaging? It does. And the maps look nice high in the sky, but when low level flying, all that resolution comes to a crumbling mess. Levels involving land invasions make the tanks look like they're taking up several streets or even running over some buildings. And with the skyscraper models on top of the image, it just looks silly. Cloud layers in the skies can look great, but there's just a certain muddy look to everything. It's not just the late 2000s brown tint. I'm assuming it's supposed to be a sort of haze effect, but it just comes off as dirty and unpolished. Jets look like they have Vaseline rubbed all over, and I couldn't help but notice how much less detailed these jets are compared to the Romanians' last venture in the skies. Project Aces 4, at this point, had 10 years of making sure that the jets were carefully modeled and detailed, showing bomb bay and rocket pod doors opening or showing the ordnance attached to the craft. In here, only the fixed frame stuff gets the detail. There's not a lot of detail that plane nerds can appreciate. And it's also strange that these aircraft clearly don't have any markings on them. We are dealing with multiple factions, and yet everyone looks the same. It's strange to look and compare between Blazing Angels 2 and HAWX to see that the former game, featuring aircraft that never fully made it into production and with wildly different scenarios, looks vastly superior in every category. Then there's the gameplay. The ERS is nothing more than a light autopilot system, and unless cornered mechanically, I never used it. If there is a missile lock, you can turn hard enough to avoid it, and maybe use your flares in a tight situation. If I want to engage something, I just turn to engage it. I could see new players using this feature maybe a handful of times before they quickly realize that they don't need to use it at all. Though the biggest issue with the gameplay is the off system. It's both overpowered and nauseating to use. Your plane is so small and can be lost in the cluster of sky, clouds, and rocket trails. It also makes controlling your jet a bit of a bastard. There were multiple times when I thought I was turning in a direction I wanted, but the controls had a mind of their own and went a completely different direction. And using freefall bombs is annoying in this mode, so you'll have to switch back and forth constantly between assisted and unassisted flying. And the game hammers the use of it since you cannot perform the same maneuvers in assisted mode, and your missiles have more lock-on opportunities in unassisted. It's great for spectacle, but not for efficiency. There's a great selection of planes, like I mentioned, and can only be unlocked by leveling. Some planes don't make sense, like the not SR-71 Blackbird. What's annoying is that the weapon packages are unlocked by different levels. There are many situations where you'll have a jet that you'll probably want to use, but have limited loadout options as the other two packages are unlocked 5, 10, sometimes 15 levels later. And no, you can't customize or create your own. They really expected this to have a sizable multiplayer population. What's also strange is that Bucharest went into all this effort into having video feed when characters are talking, but the only subtitles are in the briefings. And the animations of the mouths is the laziest. It looks like a Muppet is talking. But one of the most egregious, ham-fisted, and dullest parts of this game is the story. You play as Captain David Crenshaw, with his wingmen Talon and Casper. After helping out Captain Scott Mitchell and his Ghost Recon team in Mexico, Crenshaw and his squadron are disbanded. Though this doesn't last for too long, as a private military corporation by the name of Artemis hires the squadron to work for them, with the promise of higher wages. Wait, did Call of Duty Advanced Warfare steal from HAWX? No. Not at all. Look, I hate Sledgehammer's writing as of recent, but at least Advanced Warfare has some buoyancy narratively. Jonathan Irons doesn't take Atlas to the point of overthrowing the world because of money. He does it because he feels the United States government failed his son, and that he can run a military network better single-handedly. HAWX's story is bland and incredibly pandering that beats the player over the head to the point of concussion. Profits. Profits! The board of directors are not happy the company's down 5 points. You have a contract. Kill your American friends. No way, dude. We're American as well, and with power of patriotism, we could stop some PMC. Okay, but we're going to invade all of America and maybe Japan for some reason. This really is baby's first PMC conversation put on a mass scale, and it's all so boring. It's cool that it relates somewhat to the Grawl games, but who cares when the plot is so bland? While HAWX might not have been the smash hit that Ubisoft wanted, it did sell well enough to greenlight a sequel. The Bucharest studio would be at the helm again, though the studio was reaching its limits. They've single-handedly made 3 major titles, with HAWX 1 getting the most development time. HAWX 2 would come out exactly 1 year later after the first. Time was not on their side, and it would greatly show in the final product. But while the Romanians were doing all that they could with such little time, later in 2009, we would get one more Ubisoft published flight game, and the return of Transmission Games. Transmission at this point was still going. Not fantastically, but they were making games after Heroes of the Pacific, even releasing their own version of Ace Combat for the PS2, Wii, and PSP in 2007 under Codemasters. But sadly, Heroes Over Europe would be the studio's final game before the studio shut in October of 2009. So would this be the send-off that they wanted? Not really. Visually, it is an improvement. Brighter colors, better textures, upgraded detail, all while retaining a similar artistic style of Pacific. And it does share the same handling feel, scale of battles, and has all the aircraft you can ever want to fly. Yet, as much as I want to appreciate and enjoy this game, I simply cannot. For starters, this is the only PC version of these games that I have. Now, I've seen some interesting PC ports over the years, but this is something special. When I first launched the game, it looked terrible, as if I was playing on a PS2. Of course, I went to the video options to change the graphics. Oh. There are no graphics options whatsoever. Not even resolution settings. Turns out I had to dig into the files to find the graphics launcher to change the settings. This is the first game in my library that does not open this prior to launching the game. Fine, that's not entirely terrible. At least I can start playing. I'll just plug in my controller and nothing is working. Fine, I'll play using the keyboard. These little roadblocks can be navigated, but what cannot be remedied is the gameplay. I was very close to pulling an over G fighters with this one too, but I was determined to keep playing, because while the times when all the elements work together were fun, there are fundamental flaws that unnecessarily complicate the flow of not just the original, but most arcade flight games. Let's start with what's new with dogfighting. Ace Shot. You fly behind a target, charge up a circle, hit a button, and everything slows to a crawl. You have one opportunity to shoot out glowing parts of a plane. They can vary from hitting the engines, pilot or gunners, even the magazine for an instant kill. It's a neat idea in theory, but what it does is trivialize the combat. Enemy planes just list around in the air. It's weird to watch, as if all the AI is drunk. You watch the friendly and enemy planes fight one another, and it's the strangest thing. Sometimes they fire at one another. Most of the time, they're just flying in circles, doing nothing. The only times I've ever used Ace Shot was either because it was a level objective or trying to quickly kill bombers. Otherwise, it's a waste of time and it leaves you vulnerable, making things unnecessarily hard. I played all these games on the hardest difficulty, when applicable. It's a good challenge, makes dogfights more chaotic and fun. When you force players to slowly line up behind another plane, wait, then engage, it just adds artificial difficulty, especially when that circle resets every time you get shot at. I can only imagine why this feature exists since it seems so out of place. Probably Ubisoft said, well, HAWX has off mode in ERS, you need to add a gimmick as well. Even if I wasn't playing on the keyboard, this would still drag out the flow of combat, though Ace Shot isn't the only reason why this game sucks. You may have noticed that the HUD is very minimal. It's nice, but it causes issues. In Pacific, the HUD clearly told you when your guns were overheated. Now you have to listen for a specific wind down noise, kind of like you hit stop on a record player.
I think they're scared of them. Right.
The sound gets drowned out thanks to all the other sounds going on, which could be annoying during the more intense moments. Plus, if you're flying a plane with both machine guns and cannons, it'll play that sound twice. First being for the cannons, which can be drowned out. Speaking of the cannons, they're pretty unreliable to use. They overheat super quickly and don't really do as much damage as one may think. I swear, using a Thunderbolt which is equipped with 8 50 cal machine guns is more effective in combat than any of the planes with cannons on them. There's also a lot of repetition in the levels as well. Even in levels when you're not at those places, the other ones feel bland and repetitive. Sure, in Pacific, you were hopping from island to island or fighting over the water, but at least they were distinct enough to differentiate from one another. And somehow, narratively, Heroes Over Europe is worse than its predecessor. Crow and his story is nothing to celebrate over, but it was believable, consistent, and somewhat engaging. I don't remember a single moment in Europe's story. All the voice acting got a significant downgrade. Everyone sounds so bored, lifeless.
Red Leader, this is Control. Single sighting of a lone 109 reported at the RDF station. You'd think Jerry would give us a day off. I'm worried, Danny, that you haven't had enough rest. Ollie, did you marry my dad since the last time we met? Sir? Then stop talking like you're my bloody mum.
There's a big show on tomorrow. Maybe this is it. If it is, my girl and I have had some incredible adventures. Be good to see it through together to the end. I'll see you again, Robbie. I'm always with you. Always yours, Will.
Dear Mrs. West.
The bastard's nailing me!
Even in the most intense of moments, the voice acting is so monotone and bored. They tried to make something out of nothing with Pacific. Now they're making nothing out of something. Transmission Games was given the tools to do so much more. They even had a whole new engine powering this game, and it shows how impressive it could be in certain moments. But either due to Ubisoft's meddling in their development, lack of budget, or just poorly executed ideas, Heroes Over Europe is a weak game. Not so much a bad game, but weak in the fact that it just doesn't do anything significant with its setting and ideas. It forgets where the original succeeded. It sucks that Transmission was shut down, because if they had more time and presence, they could have been even more revered than Ubisoft Bucharest. But they were always seen as a lower class developer, and ended their legacy in a cloud of obscurity. That marked 3 franchises dead in the water. Ubisoft only had one more shot in order to take on Project Aces and Bandai Namco. 2010 would give the world HAWX 2. Would this be Bucharest's magnum opus? What do you think? I was very skeptical about going into HAWX 2. The first game's forceful nature of using certain mechanics along with the odd-feeling aircraft was enough to give me a negative bias on the sequel before playing it. And it doesn't help that the reviews at the time were even worse than before. However, as soon as I loaded into the first mission, those biases were slowly eroding. Maybe Bucharest listened to the player feedback, or they were desperate. HAWX 2 controls significantly better than the first. While the off system is still in the game, it's no longer mandatory unless you want slightly tighter turns and spectacle. Now your jet flies like a proper fighter, being able to manipulate the Gs to your advantage, feeling as near to ace combat than ever before. No longer was ERS shoving itself into your face. In fact, for 99% of the game, it's relegated to assisting you land on a runway or a carrier. Oh yeah, now you can use runways, not just landing and taking off, but for resupply points as well. And there are other nice improvements too, such as the friendly AI being competent, better detail in the graphics, vastly improved sound design. The Warthog's autocannon sounds like the actual Warthog's autocannon.
Good tone, HAWX lead. Fox kill, good shot, flight.
There's also some really neat weaponry you can use in different ways. And there was some really impressive presentation. At times. And as I was starting to enjoy my time, the glamour became null. The 18-month gap between the first and second games did not bode well for a more upgraded product. In many ways, it's more of an overall downgrade than the first. For starters, player choice has been dramatically reduced. forced into a specific plane with a specific loadout for a specific mission, which the preview looks like this. Oh. That's... Oh. Oh. Oh, that's, yeah. Well, a lot of the missions can be fun. Sometimes. Of course, Modern Warfare 1 and 2 set the gold standard when it came to mission design, especially when it came to the AC-130 and UAV levels. So in response, HAWX 2 also has an AC-130 level. Only boringer. And several UAV missions, which are fine but are the most sensitive bastards to navigate. In missions where precision aiming is required, the UAV becomes jumpy and unsteady. Dogfights can sometimes be fun, but a lot of the time they can be annoying. The enemy AI has been downgraded into 3 types of flight patterns. There's the standard style. They will fight you, turn to avoid, and use speed to try to catch up to you. Then there's the gravity and physics do not apply to me. They do these insanely sharp turns and stay at low speeds, so you either end up overshooting them or you slow down to a crawl and end up nearly stalling out. And then there's the I loaded 1 missile and 4 million flares. These guys are some of the most annoying, as all they do is just don't attack you but just fly around shooting their flares all day. So getting a lock on them is damn near impossible. There is more of an emphasis of using your autocannon since, especially on the higher difficulties, loadouts are dramatically reduced in ammo capacity. But this is dumb. You know, I actually apologize to the enemy AI, because they're not limited to 3 categories. They are just the most common. It's more a spectrum of what the fuck are they doing? Some cast a spell that makes their fighter turn into a jump jet. Some dart into ludicrous directions. Either everyone is an ace or everyone is a colossal moron. There's also the issue with mission structure. For some reason, this game constantly hands out checkpoints. Either when you complete an objective or when the game feels like it, checkpoints are handed out more than my pleas to follow and or subscribe to me on Twitch. When you die and load into a checkpoint, your plane is fully repaired and fully resupplied, which makes landing pointless. Why bother go back to base when if I'm low on everything and I just got a checkpoint, I could just slam my plane into the ground with pretty much net 0 consequence. It even massively heals whatever ally you're trying to protect. It also goes without saying that HAWX 2 performs worse than the first. No longer is it trying to run at 60 FPS. Now we got sub 30 and even dipping to single digits if you're unlucky. This must have something to do with the crunch of finishing this game, as it pretty much looks the same, albeit with more detail in the jets and scenery, but they are using GUI again for the ground textures. It does look slightly better than last time, but there are moments where it still looks quite awful. The stranger casualty of HAWX 2 comes with the story. The first story was bad, but it had the foundations of being somewhat interesting. A good story told badly. HAWX 2 is a bad story told good. The production levels and the cutscenes have been dramatically improved. Personnel running around, better-ish mouth movements, and more impactful voice acting. Everything surrounding these improvements is mediocre. No one is memorable, aside from Wolfhound, who is a part of the Russian Voron agency, which strangely ties in with Splinter Cell Conviction. But even he can't carry the weight to give this story any significance. The TLDR of this story is that Russian separatists are selling weapons to insurgents, there's a Russian civil war, the ultranationalists of Russia seize the government. Wait, is this just a condensed version of the Modern Warfare storyline? It's confusing, it's uninteresting, and downright forgettable with nothing to really salvage it aside from the occasional set piece. And it becomes very apparent that HAWX 2 got the short end of the stick. In the grand scope of things, very few were interested in the first HAWX. Bucharest was just following a contract made by Ubisoft, and HAWX 2 will simply end up being lost in the clouds. Seven games, 7 attempts at an ace combat alike, all of them failures. Which is a shame because the 2 times they had something interesting, it was either too late in a generation cycle or too mucked by its predecessor. What we'll never know is why Ubisoft, for 5 years, wanted to do this in the first place. Air arcade is an odd genre to develop. While players love to fly in many other games, the feature is either regulated to a form of transportation or a highlight in the story. Ace Combat, for an astounding 28 years, has been able to remain relevant just by its loyal fanbase and insane moments that make the waves. Whereas every other attempt to grab a piece of that pie has either failed or is on life support. Think about it. Other than Ace Combat 7, the only other game of this genre to break some sort of ground was Star Wars Squadrons. And when was the last time you thought of that game? Even though the tone of this video can be seen as mixed or even mocking...
What's happening? Am I having a stroke?
I don't have any shade to throw at Ubisoft for trying. I commend them, weirdly enough, for at least trying to break that mold over and over where everyone else back then stopped after 1 or 2 games. Bucharest tried their best despite their limitations. Transmission tried their best despite their increased limitations. But that era was a long time ago. Bucharest is still around, even made some titles that are notable. The era of an ace combat killer is long gone, but that's okay. There are games out there that share the qualities and passion that Ace Combat has. At least we can look back at the Ubisoft games and appreciate the attempts that they tried to be. Except for Overg Fighters, I really fucking hate that game.
When is a review on Reykjavik being made? Just as soon as I get a passport and a proper Canadian disguise. What is one thing you are looking forward to before the year ends? The QR2 from Fanatec. No, but for actual things that are coming out, basically, I really don't know. See, my gaming schedule has come to a point where it's like, if I see something on SkillUp's channel or just on my Steam library or even the Game Pass, I'm just like, yeah, that looks interesting enough. Like, I have no real interest in Payday 3, even though I played a shit ton of Payday 2, both on the 360 and then more on the PC. I am excited for Alan Wake 2, Skylines 2, and Spider-Man 2. Everything else is just kind of superficial. Like, I'm not totally interested in everything. The only other game that I'm most interested in seeing what happens with is The Day Before. I just want to see if it's a scam or not.